There's something almost poetic about the fact that one of the funniest men in American television history spent most of his life being overlooked, because William Frawley, the guy who made millions of families laugh every single week as the grumpy, lovable Fred Mertz on I Love Lucy, never really got the recognition he deserved while he was alive. And the way his story ended says everything about who he was and what his life actually cost him. When the final episode of I Love Lucy wrapped in 1960, Frawley wasn't there. Not because of some dramatic falling out, not because of a creative decision, but because his health had deteriorated so badly and his long battle with alcohol had taken such a toll that he simply couldn't show up, and just a few months after those lights went out for good, William Frawley was gone too, slipping away quietly, the same way he had lived, on the edges of the spotlight, close enough to feel the warmth but never quite standing in the center of it. Born on February 26, 1887, in Burlington, Iowa, Frawley grew up in a strict Irish Catholic household where his mother ran a tight ship, duty came before everything, and the idea of becoming a performer was about as practical as becoming a cloud. His father held steady work, his mother held firmly to the belief that life had an order to it, and young William fell into the rhythms of a late 19th century Midwestern town, school in the mornings, church in the afternoons, small community performances in the evenings where people sang, told stories, laughed a little, and then went back to their real lives the next morning. He sang in the choir at St. Paul's Church, took small parts at the Burlington Opera House, and learned without even realizing it how to listen, how to wait, how to read a room before stepping into it, skills that would quietly become the foundation of everything he'd ever do professionally. After school, he did what a responsible young man from Iowa was supposed to do and got himself a real job, working as a stenographer for Union Pacific Railroad in Omaha, then moving to Chicago to work as a court reporter, sitting through long trials and transcribing words all day, living neatly and predictably, everything in its proper place. But every evening after work, he'd find his way to some small stage somewhere, sing a few lines, slip back into the audience, and feel that pull that wouldn't let him go, that strange aliveness that only the stage gave him. His mother wanted him to stay sensible, so he'd return to railroad work for a while to ease her worry, but every time he did, it felt like wearing someone else's clothes. Nothing fit right, nothing felt true. Eventually, he started writing short comedy scripts and actually selling them, which was probably the first moment he allowed himself to believe that creativity could be more than a hobby. He teamed up with his brother Paul for a comedy act that didn't last long, then moved to Denver and started singing in small cafes where the audiences changed every night and nobody stayed long enough to become a regular. And it was there that he met a pianist named Fran Rath, and together they formed a simple little act. One voice, one piano, a few spoken lines threaded between familiar songs, and they took that act on the road, town after town, stage after stage, room after room, living out of bags that were never fully unpacked. This was vaudeville, and for Frawley it was a completely different education from anything he'd gotten in a classroom or a courthouse. The audience sat close in vaudeville, close enough that you could see their eyes shift, feel the air in the room change, know immediately whether a line landed or fell flat. There was no hiding, no buffer, no second chance. A perfectly timed moment could hold a room in the palm of your hand. A beat off and you lost them completely. Frawley learned to watch, to listen, to measure his voice, to hold silence just long enough that laughter could arrive naturally without being forced. He didn't become a star overnight. In fact, he never became a star in the traditional sense at all. But night after night, city after city, he was accumulating something more durable than fame. He was becoming genuinely, deeply, professionally excellent at what he did. After World War I, his act grew more polished and he partnered with a woman named Edna Louise Brout, and their double act, dialogue, song, comic timing flowing in sequence, became a real working unit. They got married in 1914, and for a while, life had a kind of structure to it. Two people moving together through a world of dressing rooms and train schedules and nightly performances, communicating through small signals on stage, a tilt of the head, a pause perfectly placed, a line returned so the laughter wouldn't fall flat. But touring life has a way of grinding things down, and by 1921 they had separated, and by 1927 the divorce was final. No children, no shared home, just two people whose paths had simply stopped running parallel. Frawley never remarried, and from that point on, the rooms he came home to were always quiet. After vaudeville, as the entertainment landscape began to shift, Frawley shifted with it, transitioning to Broadway and legitimate theater in the mid-1920s, learning the discipline of scripts and blocking and sustained character work rather than the loose, reactive energy of a live touring act. In 1932, he appeared in a play called 20th Century in a role that finally asked him to be a fully formed dramatic character from beginning to end, and something clicked into place. He wasn't just performing anymore, he was inhabiting. Then Hollywood came calling, and in 1933 he started appearing in films, eventually signing a 7-year contract with Paramount and working across more than 100 movies in every genre you can name: comedy, drama, musicals, westerns, romance. He was never the lead. His face was familiar but rarely on the poster. He played managers and policemen and tough guys standing beside the main characters, always in the right place at the right moment, always delivering exactly what the scene needed, then stepping back so the story could move forward. This was William Frawley's professional signature across every decade he worked. Not the center, but the thing that kept the center from collapsing. By the late 1940s, Hollywood was changing, younger faces were coming in, and Frawley's steadily working rhythm began to slow. The gaps between jobs stretched longer, the phone rang less often, and there were mornings where he woke up in the same coat over the chair, shoes by the wall silence, and had nowhere to be, nothing to prepare for, no cue to wait for, and that stillness, for a man who had organized his entire life around the rhythm of work, must have been genuinely suffocating. This is also where his personal struggles began to become professional liabilities. Alcohol had been part of his life since the vaudeville days, when post-show gatherings were just part of the culture, but as the work thinned and the evenings grew longer and quieter, the drinking stopped being social and became something else, a way of filling a room that no one else was filling. People who worked with him noticed that some days he was sharp and precise and completely on, and other days the air around him felt different, heavier, unpredictable. In an industry that runs on tight schedules and reliable professionals, unpredictability is its own kind of liability, and word traveled. There had also been a notorious backstage altercation in 1928 with actor Clifton Webb that didn't make the newspapers but made the rounds of every dressing room and casting office in the business, and from that point on, his reputation carried 2 layers simultaneously: a genuinely excellent performer on one side, and a question mark on the other. When television exploded in the early 1950s and audiences started staying home instead of going to the movies, it created a new opportunity for a man whose Hollywood momentum had stalled, but getting onto I Love Lucy wasn't straightforward for Frawley. CBS was genuinely reluctant. His drinking, his reputation for being difficult, his inconsistent reliability, all of it gave the network serious pause. The decision ultimately came down to Desi Arnaz, who believed that the role of Fred Mertz needed someone who understood live performance from the inside out, someone with real stage timing in their bones, and Frawley had more of that than almost anyone in Hollywood. He was brought on with clear conditions: maintain discipline, stay on schedule, be ready when the cameras roll. And Frawley, to his enormous credit, largely delivered. He arrived on time, he learned his lines fast, he understood exactly where to stand and when to speak and when to let Lucille Ball do what Lucille Ball did better than anyone on earth. Fred Mertz was never the star of I Love Lucy. He was the ballast that kept the whole ship steady, the slightly irritable, penny-pinching, wonderfully dry landlord who grounded the comedy even when everything around him was flying into beautiful chaos. His technique was almost architectural: slower rhythm, lower voice, reactions measured just precisely enough to let other people's lines breathe and land. From 1953 to 1957, he received 5 consecutive Emmy nominations for the role, which is the kind of consistency that speaks for itself, and in 1960 his name was added to the Hollywood Walk of Fame. After I Love Lucy, he moved into My Three Sons, playing Bub, an older man living in a family household, dry and blunt and quietly essential, the kind of character you don't notice you need until you imagine the show without him. He stayed with that series until 1965, and then, as his health declined steadily and heart disease began to make its presence undeniable, his career wound down not with a dramatic finale but with the same quiet professionalism he'd always shown. He entered the frame when he could, he completed his part, and when his body finally made it impossible to continue, he stepped back one last time. William Frawley died in 1966, nearly 80 years old, carrying more than 50 years of work across vaudeville stages and Broadway theaters and Hollywood soundstages and television studios, and what he left behind wasn't a legend built on charisma or a single iconic performance, but something rarer and in some ways more honest. The accumulated weight of a man who showed up, who understood his craft at the molecular level, who made everything around him function better simply by being exactly where he needed to be. Desi Arnaz mourned him. Lucille Ball spoke of him as a colleague who had helped build something that would last. And for audiences who had grown up watching Fred Mertz grumble his way through the Ricardo household every week, his passing felt like the quiet closing of a door on a particular kind of American entertainment, warm and human and a little rough around the edges, built not in a studio development meeting but in 1,000 drafty theaters in 100 forgotten towns, refined over decades by a man who never stopped paying attention to the room he was standing in. His life wasn't easy or particularly happy in the private sense. The early marriage that didn't survive the road, the empty rooms, the drinking that gave and took in equal measure, the reputation that traveled alongside his talent like a shadow, but his work was real, and his skill was extraordinary. And if you watch an episode of I Love Lucy today and find yourself laughing at a moment that Fred Mertz barely seems to be trying in, what you're actually seeing is the product of a lifetime of learning exactly how little effort great comedy actually requires when you truly know what you're doing.